Hello, I'm Robin Vincent and welcome to the December edition and the end of year special of Molten Music Monthly. So that was 2017. How about that then? A whole year ago, I didn't know anything about modular synthesis. I was still trying to make the Surface Pro 4 and the Surface Book work well for music, and I was really wondering whether making videos was a good use of my time. And here we are knocking on the door of 2018 and so much has happened. So while the sun's still shining and before I freeze my arse off, here are my highlights of 2017. But first, let's have a quick check to see if December had anything interesting in of itself. Can't make up my mind whether this is a really cool idea or just something a bit silly. Trueno or Trueno, I don't really know. It's a synth on a stick. It's on a USB stick. It's a proper analog synth, but it's just on a USB stick. So you plug it into your computer, you get a software GUI in order to access all the parameters, and you don't have to do any of that sort of mucking about that you usually have to do on hardware, you know, turning knobs, plugging in patch cables and all that really boring stuff. You can just get in there with your mouse, connect things up, record it straight into your DAW. I mean, how awesome is that? Or is that the very opposite of awesome? Like I say, I can't quite decide. I mean, I quite like the idea of having a synth on a USB stick because you could have, you know, a whole USB hub stuffed full of different classic proper analog sounding synthesizers. Except that the reason we like proper sounding analog synthesizers is because of the hardware. It's because of the physical interaction, the way that you patch things together and use something more than this one hand manipulating a mouse by tiny fractions. Because hardware for me is doing more than this. It's doing more than that. It's becoming really involved in the hardware, and that for me is what it's all about. Whereas the Trueno synth seems to put down as a feature the fact that it's not using patch cables. But you don't have to, you just use a mouse. I don't know. I mean, in some ways it harks back to the idea of having synthesizer cartridges that you plug into some kind of board. And again, I don't dislike that idea. I just think, well, you know, software synthesis has its advantages. I mean, the advantages of a software synthesis, you can run it on anything, you can have multiple instances of it going on and create huge, sort of very complex arrangements of stuff within your DAW. But you can't do that with a Trueno because it's only one. There can only be one instance because it's actual physical hardware. So it doesn't really have the advantages that software has. But at the same time, it doesn't have the advantages that hardware has because it has no knobs. It has no physical patching. It is stuck in a software GUI. So I just don't know. I mean, on the one hand, it's a great idea. You get a good analog sound in software. I mean, I guess that's it. You get an analog sound in software. That has to be its main feature because that's the only thing it has going for it. If it sounds great, then great, use it. And as I say, I still quite like the idea of just being able to plug in a different synthesizer like that. Because I guess it's not using the CPU, so you know, there's another advantage. It's just running itself. It's quite neat. Do I like that? Oh, I don't know. The Trueno. Noise Engineering release weirdly named things. They're a nightmare for someone like me who struggles with pronunciation of even the most simplest of terms. Noise Engineering really get up my nose with their sort of flabby, overinflated, kind of knobby names for things. It's always given me the idea that they're kind of a bunch of idiots, really, who are trying to sound clever. However, recently I saw a video that they did that introduced the two people behind it, Stephen McCall and Chris Kaiser. Kaiser? See, you know, I have no idea. And they made me realise that actually I had it all wrong and they're really nice. In fact, they're lovely people. And the whole thing with the names is just because they think it's fun. And they like using Latin names for things because, well, they're just nerds. And they find it just linguistically interesting to name their things interesting modules. But anyway, they've just released the Manis Iteritas. Yeah, see what I mean? Which is, oh, I don't know what it is. It's some kind of crazy oscillator noise making machine because that's what they really excel at doing, is creating these sort of combined hybrids of digital and analog noise, and often percussive, often drum, but also tuneful, melodic, noisy, gritty, fat, wide. They just pack in whatever they can into the smallest space possible. That seems to be their mission. And the Manis again has, you know, annoying things in it, like it has parameters such as smash and profundity. But now I know that I can treat it with a bit more comedy. I am really warming to the whole idea of noise engineering, and I hope to pay them a lot more attention in the future. Arturia have just updated their awesome V collection of keyboards and synthesizers to version 6 and have a whole bundle of new stuff in it. Well, not exactly a bundle of new stuff, well, four new things. Four. Is 4 a bundle? I don't know. I mean, it was going to have to do because that's what they've done, but they're 4 particularly awesome things. Well, other than the clavinet, I mean, you know, we must all have clavinet somewhere. I mean, a general MIDI clavinet is good enough for a clavinet in most situations. But the other 3, perhaps, are slightly more interesting. The first one is the Yamaha DX7. Yes, there it is, Yamaha DX7, an FM synth. Doesn't have to be some other FM synth, it is just the Yamaha DX7. And that's awesome. It's got a whole load of fabulous patches, it's very familiar, very recognisable, and of course the interface gives you a lot more editing facilities than the DX7 ever had. So as an idea, as a concept, as something to add to that collection, fabulous. Do that, awesome. They dropped in a Fairlight. Yeah, a flipping Fairlight. The whole thing, the digital sampling behemoth that I absolutely fell in love with in the 80s. I thought it was the most awesome thing ever. I would spot it in records. I could point out samples in records that were using the Fairlight. It was a great thing. And then the final one is the Buchla Music Easel. See, I've learned how to say Buchla now, although I'm now not sure if that's right. It's the Buchla Music Easel. It's this wonderful West Coast synthesis modular system put together by Buchla into kind of like a briefcase. And so it's a complete music making system of making dribbles and beeps and weirdness and stuff that comes out all over the place. That is something I'm very, very interested in. I mean, it's a different sort of modular to Eurorack modular. Why exactly is difficult to say, but it uses a different way of looking at synthesis. It uses, from the outside, very complex terms, a very sort of scientific approach that perhaps you don't find in other forms of modular synthesis. And that has always kept it a little bit unreachable for many of us, because it just seems another step beyond. It seems too complex. So I'm really looking forward to getting my teeth into the Buchla Music Easel on the Arturia V Collection. I mean, of course, it's not going to be the hardware, but it's going to let me tap into what it is that makes that tick. And all 3 of these combined kind of really touch on particular memories of my own growth through synthesizers. I mean, the first synthesizer my dad got was a DX100, which was the first synthesizer that I was able to use. And I was fascinated by the Fairlight. As I say, I was an Orc hit spotter during my early teenage years. And then now, as my interest has grown into analog and modular synthesis, then the Buchla is an awesome thing to be able to try out. So I am definitely going to be doing a review, maybe not of the whole thing, but I'll be using all of those instruments in the various testing and bits and pieces I do on the Surface Pro. And I think perhaps the Music Easel on the Surface Pro might be a winning combination. So look out for a video on that very soon. SynthTech have just released their fabulous E370 quad morphing oscillator thingy. It looks flipping amazing. I mean, they funded it on Kickstarter kind of overnight, I think it was. And you've got 4 oscillators spread out on this really wide module with this screen, and some of the displays and oscilloscope and bits and pieces you get on there just looks amazing. And all 4 of these can be various things. They can be independent oscillators, they can work together, it can work with FM, it can become a filter. There's all sorts of things packed into there. And the people who supported it on Kickstarter have finally started receiving their units. And the general consensus is it's just the greatest thing that's ever been. You know, it mixes their E340 cloud generator with their E350 morphing terranium. Do you know what that means? No, I don't really know either. Anyway, but these are kind of swarming, morphing oscillators that are just capable of moving wavetables from one place to another in really interesting and groovy ways. I think it's going to become a sort of a classic standard. The only thing is they can't really make them fast enough. They're taking pre-orders now for the ones are going to be ready in March. So if you want one, you sort of got to get in there now. So that was a December highlight. So what about the rest of the year? Well, before that, I'd like to really reach out and thank my Patreons for enabling me to purchase a new shirt. Fabulous although it is, it's too flipping cold and I'm going to have to go and get a jumper. Right, product highlights of 2017. Here we go. What was it that I particularly liked this year? Well, you'll probably find it's not as many things as you like. I mean, there's been a ton of stuff, but only a few have really risen to the top of being either innovative or interesting or groundbreaking or just enough to make me go, yeah, wow, I'm really glad that happened. So in no particular order then. First of all, Reason VST. Yes, it's like the whole world of music production went, well, thank goodness for that. Propeller Head have finally woken up and realised that the VST format is just too widespread. It's too fundamental to the making of music on audio systems and computers, and so they either have to get on board or they just have to fade into obscurity. And regardless of how good Reason is on its own, as its own self-contained workstation, without that connection to the rest of the known universe of software synthesis and effects, it was always slightly adrift. It was always slightly compromised. It meant extra work. You had to rewire it, you had to run it alongside something, or you just had to ditch a bunch of VST plugins that you like to use and just work in Reason, or swap from one to another. Whichever way you look at it, Reason without VST support was just a faff. It was just more work, and that's the last thing we need. We don't need more work. So finally, Propeller Heads got down off their high horse and have decided that VST support is what it's all about. And they did it. Weirdly, they did it in version 9.5 something. Rather than going, version 10, here you are, VST support. They did it earlier than that. Now, I think it was for really magnanimous reasons. I think it was because it meant it would be a free update to all those people running version 9 already. And it wouldn't require them to pay for an upgrade to version 10 in order to get that absolutely vital upgrade. That's my angle on it anyway, and that's what I'm sticking with, because I think Reason and Propeller Heads are both very, very awesome. I have one of these waiting for me in a box in the shed to try out. I haven't even unpacked it yet, but it's there on my list of things to do very, very soon, and that's a Seaboard Block. Now, ROLI have produced this amazing range of Seaboard keyboards which have all this MPE expression in them. MPE, which seems to have morphed from multi-dimensional polyphony expression into MIDI polyphony expression, which is fair enough, I guess. I kind of like the multi-dimensional nature of it because it wasn't then restricted to MIDI, and MIDI could evolve around it. But anyway, never mind. So ROLI have these keyboards. They're fabulous, and they create this ability to play trombones really easily and wobble things and to do individual pitch changes and timbre movements on stuff as you play, giving you extra expression as you push into it and slide about on it. Great stuff, just terribly expensive, really terribly expensive. And so when they released the Seaboard Block, which is a little mini one, a little weeny one, it brings all of that technology into the hands of someone who's only got a couple of £100 to spend. And that, I think, is excellent. It really starts to open it up so that you can add this as a controller to a larger setup and just use it for those little bits rather than having to buy this huge controller thing that's going to take over, because I don't actually think it replaces a MIDI controller. It's good as something alongside a normal MIDI controller, but it doesn't play like a piano. So if you're used to playing a proper keyboard, then the ROLI Seaboard thing is really not going to cut it. But as an expressive controller, it looks really interesting, and I hope to give it a good bit of my time very soon. And it was absolutely the right thing for ROLI to do. Talking of affordable boxes, this absolutely is not one of those. Deckard's Dream. Now this is a fabulous thing. It takes everything that I loved about Blade Runner, everything I loved about Vangelis, and everything I loved about Yamaha synthesis, and throws it all together in this box of fabulousness. You know, it's a dreamy synthesizer and could quite possibly be one of the coolest synths on the planet right now. It's modelled itself on the Yamaha CS80, which is what Vangelis used in a large amount of the Blade Runner soundtrack, and it's that kind of vibe that they're going for. I mean, it looks great, it should sound amazing, and it's pitched perfectly to hit all the warmth and loveliness that we have with the original Blade Runner movie. The newer Blade Runner movie, that's a little bit more up in the air. I mean, personally, I adored it. I sat through that in like a zen-like state of IMAX 3D mesmerized gorgeousness. It just flowed through me. And I made special note about the music, and I felt that the music was apt and enveloping, and it created the environment that it needed, but it just didn't quite have any classic motifs like the original did. In fact, at the end, there's this little twinkle of the Tears in Rain part from the original movie, and that just like goes, wow, that's fantastic. That little piece of melody just lifted everything, and that's kind of what the new soundtrack for the new movie was missing, if anything. But anyway, back to the Deckard's Dream. It just looks to be an amazing synthesizer of 8 voices of polyphony, MPE support, all this stuff built in, all the sliders on the front, and there's more expansions for it to come. There's authentic wave shaping and filter topology built into it to give it a real authentic feel. Or not, you can also take that out if you wish. It starts at about $3,500, or you can just buy the PCBs as a kit and source all the other components yourself for a lot less money. But either way, it would be a really interesting thing to have a go of. Roland have really outdone themselves this year with their boutique releases, more so than before. I think they've got sort of interestingly creative and are starting to find the limitations within their boutique form factor, but they're just ploughing on ahead anyway. This time they surprised us with a collaboration with Studio Electronics, and they created something new rather than just a reissue of something they've already done or a software modeled version of something. This was actual analog, it was real, and it sounded fantastic. Studio Electronics build or have been building analog synthesizers for a very long time, so they have a great pedigree to bring to it. Roland obviously sort of have lost their analog pedigree somewhere along the line, but they have been awesome at sort of modeling and recreating it digitally. So combining that with, you know, the precise nature of Studio Electronics and Roland's kind of digital expertise at doing extraordinary things, it really brought together the SE02 as a fabulous little synthesizer. It's a monosynth, it's got a whole load of knobs over the top, it's got an inbuilt sequencer with the nice buttons in a row along here. Great. Very usable, very hands-on, sounds fantastic. The only thing is that there's a lot of synthesizer squeezed into a very small space, because those boutique synths, they're small. They really are small. I mean, you're talking about, you know, not much bigger than a sheet of A4, maybe folded like that, you know, they're tiny. And so to fit all those knobs in has been quite a struggle. But they did it, and it's great, and it's well priced at under $500, and is a decent piece of analog monosynth. But Roland weren't done, oh no. They also released the long-awaited SH101 as a boutique reissue. This was called the SH01A, and was a far more perfect choice for the form factor, because it's already a small kind of monosynth, and all the sliders and knobs and bits and pieces can fit into that space a bit more easily. It still feels a little weeny, but this one was a bit more workable, I think. And not only did they model the SH101, but they also increased it to 4-voice polyphony, which is genius. So it's a polysynth. It has mono modes and unison modes, but also 4 voices of polyphony. So it sounds just like an SH101, if you like, or it can sound like something completely different. And that's really what you want in a synthesizer. All the reissue of stuff is good and interesting because it gives us access to stuff that we've always dreamed about, but my view is that it also needs to push forward. It also needs to offer something that wasn't there before. And this does that brilliantly. And then they still weren't done. They snuck out the D05, which is a reissuing of the Roland D50 linear arithmetic synthesizer. The D50 was the massive plastic sort of faceless workstation that we all wanted in the late 80s, early 90s. That was the kind of synth that we want. We wanted a Korg M1 and we wanted a Roland D50. I don't know why. I don't know why. I mean, you go to a music shop and you would just play it and there would be these huge sounds like you've never heard before, like you'd never experienced. That's what we wanted. Massive pads, things going on, digital sounds, all this sort of multi-layered madness. That seemed to be what we wanted. We were mad. But anyway, Roland have come back and have put that into a boutique, which is perfect because it had bugger all controls in the first place. So the space that you have on the boutique form factor is irrelevant. They don't need it because it still has bugger all controls. But they have packed in a sequencer like the D20 had, because I actually had a D20, which was like the sequencer enabled version of it. And they've packed that into the D05. They've also got a little joystick there and a few other buttons and bits and pieces, but it's a perfect thing. And also because it's a digital synth, it's not anywhere near as difficult to emulate that in the software modeled version that's in the boutique. So if you're into those kind of 80s, 90s sounds, that kind of wash of digital padness and electric pianos and bits and pieces, then this is the perfect boutique for you. Eurorack then. Whoa, I mean, there was loads and loads, dozens and dozens of different modules, all of them fascinating and interesting in their own way. I mean, because I'm fairly new to modular, it becomes particularly interesting. Oh wow, look, it's a VCO. Yeah, all right, there's hundreds of those. I know, but look at this one, and oh, look at this one. It's like being, in a toy shop. Oh, God, it's so cold. Just relocating over here back into the sunshine for what it's worth. But yeah, tons and tons of Eurorack. I mean, the only new module this year that I actually purchased, because everything else I bought had already been around a fair while, but the one that caught my eye, that I just felt I had to have, was the System 80 Jove filter. Now, it's a filter based on the Roland Jupiter 6, and it absolutely is as wet and flabby and fabulous and musical as I've always expected a filter to sound like. It's just amazing. And also the quality of the build, the knobs and everything is excellent. So that's probably one of my favourite modules of the entire year that came out. So what other Eurorack highlights were there? Well, to name a few, the IntelliGel Plonk that had the applied acoustics, acoustic modelling inside, looked pretty interesting. Erica Synths launched a whole load of stuff, but probably the standout module for them was the Octasource Strange 8 modulation LFO thingy, and also the drum sequencer computer, which they showed at Super Booth, which is now kind of missing in action, but they tell me that they're still working on it and hope to have some news in the new year. Make Noise's Morphogenie was probably the most interesting thing to come out of them this year. They, for some reason, don't want to call it a sampler, because that's kind of what it is. They like to use, or rather invent, their own sort of vintage language for it to make it seem like it's kind of something else. Well, I mean, maybe it is something else, but essentially it samples audio and then does interesting things with it. And that's got absolutely everybody in a flutter over that thing. Perhaps a more simpler idea is a Tip Top Audio's One. This is just a sample player. You put a bunch of samples on a card, stick that in, and trigger it in your Eurorack. The Radical Technology Swarm looked fairly amazing, as did the weird looking sequencer from Zeta Ohm. But the sequencer that seemed to stand out this year was probably the Eloquencer from Winter Garden. And it's a big, chunky module, but it's got this wonderful display of LEDs in the middle that all lights up and does weird and wonderful stuff. And it has 8 whole channels of sequencing going on, but its sort of standout feature is it has all this controlled chance going on, all this probability that's fed through all the different aspects of it. So it starts to randomize, or it doesn't, or you keep that under some kind of control. So there's small amounts of randomization going on in all sorts of different and interesting ways. I've seen that a lot. There's been a lot of modular videos coming out this year that have the Eloquencer in there doing its thing. I'm loving everything that Trueno seem to do. Their Scion module for sucking CV out of plants is particularly interesting, but they seem to keep cropping up with interesting bits that don't seem to be available yet, but it looks like they've got another oscillator coming along and another filter, and then there's this Harmonic harmonizer as well. All of their modules are simply beautiful, and I hope to have something of theirs in my rack before too long. But there are far too many modules to go into any detail at this point, and it's been a fabulous year for Eurorack. I mean, the only disappointment that I had was that my own sort of Christmas present to myself was a Moleko Varigate 4 Plus, which looks like a fabulous little sequencer for my Eurorack. And I pre-ordered it and they sent it out and it got to the post office on Christmas Eve. It got to the post office and they wouldn't deliver it because, well, they're all going home for Christmas. And at the moment, I'm waiting for it to arrive at any moment now. But it's been an awesome year for Eurorack, and I hope that 2018 is going to be even better. Now, the development of VCV Rack has been nothing short of extraordinary, sort of monumental, or at least amazing on every sort of level. I mean, this little bit of beta software popped up, VCV Rack. Yeah, you can plug in a few modules, and then, oh, that's interesting. They seem to have sort of stolen all of the guts of all the mutable instruments. Thought that was going to be my variegate. Well, it was the bill for the tax for the variegate they've got to pay before they can deliver it. Still chasing the sun around the place. VCV Rack then, yes. And hey, look, they've stolen all of the sort of firmware from the mutable instruments modules and put them together in software and called them something slightly different. I thought that was a bit cheeky, but also very interesting. And armed with a few sort of basic modules and bits and pieces, you could patch together some interesting noises. I thought, I can't wait until this becomes a proper release. But in the meantime, it has been completely embraced and taken on by a whole load of developers. I mean, there's something like 50 developers now working on it, and there's over 300 modules covering everything. I mean, it has everything. I mean, this is a free piece of software, currently free, where most of the modules are free, that models entirely the Eurorack synthesis experience and puts it onto your computer for free. You can play with clouds and braids and sequencers and modulators and VCOs and VCAs and VCFs and LFOs and everything. It's all there. You can patch it all together. It works exactly how a Eurorack modular synth would work. There's no shortcuts. There's no behind the scenes jiggery pokery going on like there is perhaps in something like Reason. No, this is the real deal. And it's endless, as big and as wide and as fat as you want it to be. It's stunning. It really is a stunning piece of work. I mean, definitely the quality of the design of the front panel of individual modules can vary from one to another. Some of them just simply look awful, but other ones look amazing. But it's the functionality ultimately is what you're trying to get to. Does this mean that you no longer have to buy hardware? Is this going to give you the software experience that means you don't have to drop a load of money and stuff? I don't know. Those are interesting questions. I mean, it still hasn't quite made it to version 1 yet. It's on version 0.5, but the amount of stuff available for it is just staggering. I don't know whether that's a good or a bad thing. I mean, I found when I first ran VCV Rack that it was as hard as Eurorack is. Eurorack is difficult. You have to understand where things go. And if you were to sit down with this enormous palette of potential sounds, I think you're going to be frustrated very quickly because you're not going to work out how things go together. You need to start with smaller things, with basics, with a VCO and a VCA and a filter and an envelope maybe, and work out how they react to each other and how they work. I mean, for me, it was a loss of interest in software really that took me into hardware Eurorack. And so even though this looks like a fantastic emulation, it's still software, and so doesn't really pull me in. Because, I mean, maybe it's just me. I don't know. But having some hardware and some patch cables and just exploring how those plug together, doing that physically with my hands, feeling how they go in, hearing the difference and adjusting things, that for me is totally intuitive. It's play, it's making music. Whereas in software, trying to do the exact same thing but with a mouse, with the virtual cables, it doesn't give me anything like the experience. You might be doing exactly the same thing, but it just does not give you that feedback. It doesn't, it just simply doesn't. It's interesting, yes, and it can create great sounds, yes, and you can get in there and do that, and that's all fine, but there's no way that software replicates the experience that I'm having in hardware. It's a difficult thing to explain, and it makes it sound like, oh yeah, well you've just spent all your money on stuff and so therefore you're trying to self-justify yourself. Yeah, I don't know, there might be an element of that, because if I've paid my money for something, bought a piece of hardware, I'm invested in it. I've already committed to it. I've already put some of myself into it. Whereas something that is free has no value. And so we subconsciously, or something else, something in that, we treat it as such. We don't treat it as seriously. We don't invest as much of ourselves in it. That's just a thought. That's just my thoughts on that. I mean, this VCV Rack thing is extraordinary. I think they've done a fantastic job, and I hope it continues, and I hope it becomes a standard of plugins so that other people start putting their expertise into it. That would be amazing. So it's fantastic. So don't get me wrong. I have nothing against VCV Rack at all. I would just put out there that it isn't the same. For me, it's not the same. I hope to do a review of it, and I hope to demonstrate how they differ, but also how fantastic VCV Rack is, because it could possibly open up a whole load more people to the joy and wonder of patching synthesizers together. And that's ultimately what it's all about. Native Instruments sent me one of these to review, and I pretty much loved it. It's a great thing. It's a great combination of hardware and software. I've had a whole load of comments from people saying, oh, well, the hardware doesn't do this, the hardware doesn't do that, I can't control this, that, the other, or it doesn't remember things without using the software. That's right, it's a hardware-software combination. It's a hybrid. You don't buy a Komplete Kontrol Mark II just because you want to control something that has MIDI. It is a MIDI controller, it can do that, but that is not its primary function. Its primary function is the way that it works with its software, with the Komplete Kontrol software, the way that that pulls presets together, the way that it allows you to manipulate sound and instruments that are plugged into it, the way that it maps, and the ease with which you can sit down and play. That's what it's about. Stop belly aching about whether it can control this or control that. It can if you map it to it, if you use the software, but if you just want it as a dumb MIDI controller, then it's not particularly good at that. That's not its forte. It does it, but there's probably other keyboards that do it better. But for me, as someone who has kind of lost confidence in software synthesis, it really brought me back in. It gave me access to all these sounds that I've kind of not found, or I've ignored, or not really gotten to grips with, and it opened that all up. It really enabled me to play and experiment and to enjoy all of those synths and stuff that I've got on my computer that just sit there gathering dust most of the time. And so in its combination of software and hardware, I think they really almost nailed it. It has its flaws, there's things it doesn't do quite right, or I found a bit mystifying, but check out my full review I did of it for all of the detail, and I hope you'll see what it is that the Komplete Kontrol Mark II is really, really good at, and perhaps things that it isn't. A recent update has, I believe, included support for DAWs such as Cubase and Nuendo, which is great because it needs a bit more of that, because that's one side where these things are lacking. Microsoft keeps on pursuing this dream of the most ultimate and awesome laptop touch hybrid type thing experience. And they released both the Surface Pro 2017, as we're having to call it because they've dropped the number, and the Surface Book 2. Somehow with not quite so much fanfare as they have done in the past. But they are still very exciting developments nonetheless. On the upside, the Surface Pro seemed to work pretty much out of the gate. You know, it had its quirks and bits and pieces, but certainly with the creators updates and various updates that came soon after its release, it kind of pulled itself together. And I spent a lot of time testing all sorts of DAW software and bits and pieces with it, and you should go and check out that video if you're interested. So now it's become a pretty decent music making platform, complete with the potential and possibilities of touch, of pen, and also now this dial thing. I mean, the dial is interesting. It hasn't exactly set things alight particularly, but is dripping with potential. If only we could work out how the heck we harness it for music software. I hope to do a bit more of an investigation into that. On the downside, Microsoft still seem to be oblivious of Thunderbolt, which is a shame because a decent Thunderbolt port in the side would really sort us out in a whole number of different ways, particularly in terms of audio interface. That would be great because you could run Thunderbolt interfaces, Firewire interfaces, and USB audio interfaces all through that same port, and it would just open it up. And generally, Microsoft still ignore us music makers. They focus very heavily on those sorts of artists who like to use a pen, who like to draw, and they have fully embraced anyone who scribbles anything onto a Surface. But anyway, I have tested out the Surface Pro 2017 and found it to be pretty darn good. So please check out my video detailing all of that. And I hope to do a lot more demonstrating of bits of software and testing over and throughout 2018. We lost a lot of stuff this year. We had discontinued stuff from Mutable Instruments, their awesome clouds and braids, their probably most popular modules. They've now decided not to do anymore. Dreadbox have also discontinued the Erebus, which is a great little synth, along with the Hades DIY that they did quite briefly. Moog have said goodbye again to the Model D and also to the Moog Voyager XL. But probably the biggest loss that we've seen in music technology for ages was Gibson deciding that Cakewalk, they just couldn't be bothered. They just couldn't be bothered with it. Nah, it's just not fitting in with whatever it is that Gibson have in their heads. I'm not sure what that is because their guitars seem to be having a bit of a trouble at the moment. Maybe they're moving into some kind of consumer-orientated electronic devices, and having to support millions of Sonar users just wasn't really going to work out for their shareholders. I don't know. I think Gibson are in money troubles, and supporting people is always going to be a drain on resources. I mean, as part of that, there's also part, perhaps, that Cakewalk moved to this kind of subscription model that people just don't like. We don't like. I much prefer to use something, to enjoy a piece of software, to use it, and then if new features come out that I like, I then like to sort of work myself up to a decision to purchase the upgrade or not, you know, depending on how useful it is, how much I'm using it, and whether I think those new features are going to be worth it or not. You don't really get that opportunity if you subscribe. You end up paying money all the time and always getting updates, but there's no sense of getting something new and exciting because it's just sort of dripping along and you're endlessly giving them money for just little things. There's no sense of a big release. Look at these big things we've been working on that you can have if you want it, you know. And often I can justify an expensive purchase as something that's kind of accidental, like 150 quid upgrade on a piece of software. Yeah, all right, I'll just throw some money at that. Oh yeah, I'll just go out and try to forget about it and go without food for a week. Whereas a subscription is like, it's yet another monthly bill. I don't know, maybe that was a factor. Oh, I don't know, I'm just running on really. It seems to work for other people. But in any way, they just went, boom, that was it. Cakewalk, bang, you're gone. All those millions of Sonar users, bang, nothing. You are gone. It's all over. And that's really sad. I mean, they are one of the longest running DAWs out there. They've always been on Windows. That's worked brilliantly. And their development from a basic sequencer through to audio, through to Sonar, through to big studio solutions, it's been great. It's had a flavor to it that has really suited a whole bunch of people. And I think it's going to be difficult to move to something else. My advice to Cakewalk users is probably to check out Studio One, also to check out Reaper. And those would be the sort of bits of software I think that you would find most familiar. But for whatever reason it happened and whatever's gone on, it's a very sad thing. And I hope that all the employees of Cakewalk have found something else to do with their awesome skills. And finally, those Adidas TR808 trainers. They caused quite a bit of a stir back in the summer when images emerged of this pair of trainers, Adidas trainers, with all the TR808 colouring, all that black and orange and yellow. But then they also had an inbuilt drum machine. The idea being that you could walk and make beats at the same time. The internet went bonkers. All those lifestyle glossy coffee table magazines did super spreads on it, and it became this phenomenon in like the space of a couple of weeks. Apparently it got something like 6 billion views worldwide. Now, as everyone went completely bonkers, I, as usual, was the only voice of reason in the entire thing, as I commented that actually it's kind of vaporware. Well, there's no kind of about it. It is vaporware. It's a concept. It says it's a concept. It says, look what we conceptually put together in order to fulfill a brief. It's a pair of trainers with an inbuilt drum machine that looks like a TR-808. I mean, they look great, don't get me wrong, but it was just something made up. But anyway, Margot Neely from Neely and Daughters, who are behind the concept, they got in touch with me to say, oh yeah, we like what you said, the fact that the whole thing's fake, but it's not fake. It's not fake at all. It's a real thing, or at least it will become a real thing. It's in the concept stages now, but the interest we're getting is saying that we really should develop it into something. And that's what we're going to do. I said, cool, yeah, you go do that. Absolutely. Well, anyway, I was writing an article for Gear News about whatever happened to in 2017, and the Adidas trainers were right up there as something where nothing has happened at all. So I sent Margot an email to say, oh, just checking, see, you know, if anything's happened to that awesome pair of trainers that you had. And she came back saying, yes, it's fantastic, it's fabulous, it's awesome. We had 6 billion views. Did we know we had 6 billion views? We got 4 million new followers. It's the most extraordinary social phenomenon ever created in the world of wearable fashion music technology / drum machine trainer type stuff. I mean, you can't argue with that. And she said, absolutely, it's a goer. There's every manufacturer in the world has got in touch wanting to have a similar wearable pair of something or other styled in their style of things, but they haven't quite decided whether they're still sticking with Adidas or maybe they'll go with some other clothing manufacturer. It's all still being moved around and they're fielding offers from various places and considering things. And in the meantime, Margot has come up, apparently, with an even more awesome idea, something even more revolutionary that's going to completely change the way we look at wearable technology. She used the words game changer. Oh yes, this is going to be the one that really does it. You couldn't tell me what it was exactly, but it sounds exciting. I mean, if you could bottle her enthusiasm, her fabulousness, and her self-confidence, then you would absolutely have a product to sell there. And I hope they come up with something. I mean, she seems really driven and excited about the prospect of doing something with either the TR-808 drum machine trainer thingy or with this new thing that she's got. And I hope they do. But, you know, here we are at the end, 6 months later, the end of 2017, and nothing has actually happened. But maybe it will. Who knows? So how has 2017 been for Molten Music Technology? Well, it's been a fascinating and fabulous year. I mean, this year we've been building computers, we've been making videos on the Surface and testing the new Surface Pro 2017. I've embarked on an entire journey into modular synthesis, and we've been reviewing new products and interesting things and bringing tips and tricks and news to you out there in video land. I've been going to synth meets and synth shows. I've launched a Patreon campaign to try to gather a club of people who are interested in supporting me in creating more video content. And in all of that, I've been having a fantastic time putting together these videos and meeting people and talking to people and being able to express my passion for music technology. This year I have produced 54 videos. That includes 15 videos on modular synthesis and all that stuff going on there. There's another 15 videos on using the Surface in music and audio production. I've managed to squeeze out 10 Molten Music Monthlies, which is almost one a month. And this year we've gathered over 500,000 views, we've gained 6,000 subscribers, and I've been watched for 3.3 million minutes. That's amazing. I mean, it's not that I'm amazing. I don't mean that I'm amazing, but rather it's amazing that people are watching this and enjoying this, and that I seem to be mostly doing a half-decent job of it. I mean, I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate the overwhelmingly positive comments and interactions I have with people, both online and also increasingly in real life. I mean, I love it. I love making these videos. It's the best thing ever. And the fact that you are watching is just completely amazing. So thank you. This time last year, I was really starting to question the whole idea of making videos, about what I was doing. I mean, the Surface Pro stuff was going really well and I was really interested in that, but I wasn't sure what else to do because it wasn't enough. I couldn't sustain it. I couldn't keep it going purely on that. And so about a year ago, I decided that this modular synthesis, which had been growing increasingly in my awareness as I've been writing about it, I've been doing far more journalistic sort of blogging activities on synthesis, and of course modular started growing up through that. So it looked to me like some sort of journey into putting together a modular synthesizer might be very, very interesting. So I thought, sod it, I'll give it a go. I'll just get stuck in and I'll start making videos and I'll see what happens. And I have to say the response has been awesome. It's been great. I've been really bowled over and surprised about how many people have welcomed my input, if you like. Because I'm no expert in these things. I just have a way, I think, of approaching stuff and talking about it and unpacking it that seems to appeal to a broad spectrum of people. Newbies in particular, of course, all of us starting out for the first time. I think my experiences that I've had in this little journey have been helpful. And that's all I want. I just want to put helpful stuff out there. And that seems to have really caught people's imagination, which is great. And that's enabled me to go further, to push further, to do more. And now as I'm planning out the next couple of months of videos, I find myself in a really privileged situation where I can invest in this Eurorack business a little bit, because I can then use that to create more videos and more content and keep on going down this journey. So I'm extremely fortunate in doing this, and it's awesome that people want to support me in that. You know, over this whole journey, I've sort of simultaneously felt awe-inspired, felt stupid, ignorant, but pleased and creative, artistic, and I think I've ended up being more musically creative than I have been in years. And it's cost some money. I've had to sell a whole load of gear in order to fund it, but it has been so worth it. I've learned so much, and I've still got a whole load of stuff to learn, but hopefully that'll be a continual process. I did a stag of testing on the Surface Pro 2017 over the summer, and I was able to report that it's good for audio and music production on the whole. I confess that since then I have neglected it a little bit in favour of all the modular stuff that I've been doing. But I'm still hoping in 2018 to find a better balance, to be able to do more Surface videos at the same time as doing more modular videos. That's always going to be the struggle, that dynamic, and what to spend my limited time and resources on. But I have a lot more Surface videos planned almost immediately. I hope that's going to be the next thing that I'm going to do. But do please, if this is something that interests you, do get in touch and let me know what it is that you'd really like to see, what I could focus on. Or even better, you could join my little Patreon club, and that way you could sign up as a Surface supporter, because at the moment most of the club is filled up with modular people. So that is kind of where I'm inclined to put my focus. But in either case, I'm going to be doing both, but a bit of support is always very welcome. People seem to like the reviews I do, which makes me very happy, because I find them really sort of difficult and strange. It's one of those things, because I read a lot of reviews. Being in this business, you read a lot of reviews, you see a lot of review videos, and for the most part, they frustrate me. They frustrate me greatly. They hardly tell you anything. They hardly get into the details. I mean, it just amuses me greatly that sort of seconds after a product has been released, you'll see a review on a blog, and it's not a review. It's just a highlight of some of the features. There's no review going on. It's just a slightly expanded press release. You know, it's ridiculous. Reviews take time. You need to put time and effort into them and then demonstrate it, show it working. And that's what I aim to do. That's what I aim to do in my reviews, is to talk through the entirety of a product, demonstrating it, hopefully, as I go, and opening it up so that people can understand what it is it's trying to do and whether it's any good. I mean, most stuff is good to some degree or other, and I hope to be able to share my thoughts and feelings on why something is good, but also where it falls down, where it trips up, and where it's not quite really working as well. This year I've been able to review the Surface Book, Bitwig Studio 2, the Komplete Kontrol S49 Mark II, the Make Noise STO oscillator, and just very recently the Master and Dynamic MH30 foldable headphones. My shortlist for new reviews at the moment is Reason 10, Traction Waveform. Erica Synths have sent me a black VCO and expander to review, which I'll be getting onto very soon. I have that Seaboard Block, and also the Moleko Variegate 4 Plus, which should arrive any day. So I've got lots to get my teeth into. And I hope with a bit of luck, to hit 20,000 subscribers and over 2 million views this year. And if you're a manufacturer out there of something music technology-esque and interesting and want to send it in for one of my reviews, then please do so. Although I would recommend having a look at one of my reviews first, just to see how I approach these things. So yeah, this time last year, I wasn't even sure that I was going to be doing any more videos, and here we are, and videos seems to be the best thing that I do. So I want to be doing more. I want to be doing more Molten Modular, more Surface Pro audio, more reviews, more news, more tips, more content of every kind to do with music technology. So that's going to be fun. And if you want to keep up with the day-to-day news of synthesizers and music technology, then follow me over on gearnews.com. I'm the synth correspondent there, and you'll find opinion-led news articles from me every single day. It's not just the reprinting of press releases, we actually share our opinion on stuff. So it's a bit more edgy, I guess. But that'll do, I think. That was 2017. And do consider sponsoring me on Patreon, throw me a few dollars, a few quid, buy me a beer, a coffee, something like that, just to enable me to keep this content flowing. I would really appreciate your help. I really appreciate your support. But thank you if you're a watcher, a subscriber, a lurker, anyone who's come across my videos and has enjoyed watching it, then thanks. Thanks for stopping by. And I'd like to wish you a very, very happy new year, and let's have a whole load of fun in 2018. And in the meantime, go and make some tunes.